When the massive storm finally cleared, residents of Millbrook gathered around their fallen landmark, a 200-year-old oak that had defined their town square for generations. As excavators began removing the extensive root system, operator Thomas Wilkins noticed something unusual and immediately halted all work. When town officials gathered around the bizarre discovery beneath the ancient roots, the truth about their community left them completely speechless. The town of Millbrook was nothing remarkable on a map, just a small settlement nestled in a valley, surrounded by rolling hills and verdant forests. But what made this place special to its residents were the majestic oak trees that had witnessed the town's entire history. And among these silent sentinels stood one that outshined them all. A colossal oak tree in the town square, estimated to be over 2 centuries old. This wasn't just any tree. Standing at nearly 70 feet tall with a trunk so wide that 5 adults holding hands couldn't encircle it, the oak had become the heart and soul of Millbrook. Every important event in town history happened beneath its sprawling branches. Weddings, festivals, public announcements, all took place in the shade of what locals simply called the Old Oak. For generations, the tree was a source of pride, but in recent years, attitudes had started to shift. A growing number of residents, particularly newer arrivals to Millbrook, viewed the ancient trees as problematic rather than precious. Leading this movement was Richard Benson, a business developer who had moved to town just 3 years prior. Benson was a charismatic man who knew how to work a crowd. At town meetings, he would pace back and forth, pointing to photographs of damaged property and broken sidewalks. He gathered homeowners who had experienced problems, turning their individual complaints into a collective grievance against the old trees. The Miller family became unwilling celebrities in this campaign when their basement wall cracked from the pressure of growing roots. The repair costs had nearly bankrupted them. Other stories followed. The Johnsons' plumbing system had been completely destroyed by invasive roots. The community center's foundation was shifting, and several historic sidewalks had buckled beyond repair. Benson argued passionately that the town was clinging to the past at the expense of the future. The land occupied by these trees, particularly the central oak, could be used for commercial development that would bring jobs and prosperity to Millbrook. His campaign gained momentum, especially among homeowners dealing with costly repairs. On the opposing side stood a coalition of conservationists, historians, and longtime residents who viewed the trees as living monuments. They argued that the trees predated the town itself and deserved protection. Margaret Wilson, whose family had lived in Millbrook for 5 generations, often reminded everyone how her great-great-grandfather had proposed to his wife beneath the old oak. The debate divided the town, with each side becoming increasingly entrenched in their position. Benson's group had successfully gathered enough signatures to force a town vote on removing all the ancient trees, starting with the old oak. The vote was scheduled for the following month, and tensions were running high. Then nature intervened in a way that no one could have anticipated. Weather forecasters had warned of a significant storm system approaching, but Millbrook had weathered many storms before. No one expected anything out of the ordinary. They were wrong. The storm that descended upon the valley that night was unlike anything in living memory. Wind howled through the streets with such force that it tore shutters from windows and ripped shingles from roofs. Rain fell in blinding sheets, turning streets into rivers and yards into ponds. Throughout the night, residents huddled in their homes, listening to the terrifying sounds of nature unleashed: cracking wood, crashing debris, and the constant roar of wind and water. When dawn finally broke and people emerged from their homes, they found a changed landscape. Fallen branches littered the streets, power lines were down across the town, and several smaller trees had been completely uprooted. But the most shocking sight awaited them in the town square. The old oak, which had stood firm through centuries of storms, had finally met its match. The massive tree lay on its side, its enormous root system partially exposed like the tentacles of some prehistoric creature. The fall had damaged the eastern corner of the historic town hall, though thankfully no one had been injured. As residents gathered around the fallen giant, the reactions were as divided as the town itself had been. The town council quickly organized recovery efforts. Within days, crews with chainsaws and heavy equipment moved in to clear the debris and remove the fallen landmark. The plan was simple: cut up the trunk for timber, grind the stump, and excavate the roots to prepare the area for whatever would come next. Thomas Wilkins operated the main excavator. A lifelong resident of Millbrook with 30 years of experience in construction, Thomas had a reputation for meticulous work. He was 3 hours into excavating the massive root system when something caught his attention. He immediately shut down his machine and climbed out for a closer look. The roots weren't growing randomly as he had expected. They formed what appeared to be hollow channels that extended in specific directions. Word spread quickly, and soon a crowd gathered around the excavation site. The town mayor arrived, followed by several council members and curious residents. Thomas pointed out the unusual patterns in the root structure. The channels appeared deliberately formed, creating a complex network that extended far beyond what anyone had expected. Even more curious was the direction of these channels. They all seemed to lead away from the town center and toward the river that ran along the eastern edge of Millbrook. As the excavation continued under the watchful eyes of town officials, Thomas made another startling discovery. Nestled deep among the roots, protected by the very wood that many had wanted to destroy, was a cylindrical object. It was a copper tube, now green with age, but remarkably intact and sealed at both ends. The mayor carefully extracted the cylinder and with gloved hands opened it. Inside was a collection of yellowed papers, remarkably preserved. The documents turned out to be detailed maps and diagrams, signed by Elijah Harris, the founder of Millbrook, who had established the settlement nearly 2 centuries ago. The papers revealed a truth about the town that had been forgotten over generations. According to Harris's writings, the valley location where he had chosen to build Millbrook was actually prone to severe flooding. Before establishing the settlement, he had observed that the low-lying area would be underwater for weeks each spring when snowmelt and rain combined to swell the nearby river beyond its banks. The extensive root systems did exactly what they were designed to do: pull water away from the town center and channel it through the elaborate underground network toward the river. The very damage that newer residents had complained about, foundations cracked, sidewalks buckled, gardens disturbed, was evidence of the trees performing their vital function. The final page of Harris's documents contained a clear warning. If the central tree ever fell, a replacement must be planted immediately in the same location. Without this keystone tree, the entire water management system would fail, and the annual floods would return to reclaim the valley. For Richard Benson and those who had campaigned against the trees, it was a humbling moment. The vote to remove the remaining ancient oaks was unanimously canceled. In the end, the fallen old oak taught Millbrook a powerful lesson about respecting the wisdom of those who came before. The new saplings planted in the town square wouldn't reach the magnificent height of their predecessor in anyone's lifetime, but they would carry on its essential work. How far do you think we should go to preserve nature's wisdom, even when it seems inconvenient to our modern lives?